Hello and welcome back to our second portion of the Jesus birth episodes of our page. And this goes through what we typically hear as the Christmas story. So if we all look at our nativity sets, there are quite a few things that are off. There's so much more to the story that makes it so extraordinary. And we'll get into all the different aspects of that. So the birth itself is never actually mentioned in any of the Gospels, which lends itself to the idea that Jesus was truly a man. Like any man, he was born in the same way. There was no shining light or doves flying around and a halo appears. There was nothing of that. You had to assume at this point in Jesus' life, he was just a man who had a birth like anyone else. And the story goes, and the main characters are the Magi, who are wise men who came from the East. Those three guys in the robes who bring all the different gifts to Jesus. At that point, we always hear that there are three because there were three gifts. But in reality, they never mention how many Magi there actually were. There could be hundreds, there could be, they use they, so you'd assume more than one. Nowadays, sometimes you can't be too sure about what they mean with that. So you have the Magi, and they see a light. They see a star, and they know what this means. And a lot of people don't ask themselves, why do they know what this means? Why are these Magi, these something of sorcerers or doctors who are from Babylon to the east, and why are they here to go visit the King of the Jews and to bow down and give gifts to this Jewish person? And that goes back to our story of Daniel, who obviously was taken as a child, became one of the leaders of the Magi, gave them a prophecy, gave them the time and the location of Bethlehem, and was able to, through his miracles and faith, was able to convince the people in Babylon, specifically Nebuchadnezzar, at the beginning of that this God of the Hebrews was something very special. So they go back, they're looking for, you're looking for the King of the Jews. So who do you go to? You go to the royal family, who was Herod the Great, who was a really sinister guy, very paranoid. He was always obsessed with the idea of somebody else being able to take his kingdom from him. He was an Edomite, which are descendants of Esau, and that's Jacob's brother. If you remember back to that story, he trades his birthright. So these people are technically not Jews, at least according to the Jews at that time. And when Rome takes over, they actually give these guys all the power to be this vassal king. So they're in charge here. So the wise men are looking, they're figuring, if this is going to be the King of the Jews, we should go ask whoever's claiming to be the King of the Jews at this point. When they get there, Herod is there. He asks him a bunch of questions, trying to figure out how he could eventually kill him. He figures out how old Jesus must be by asking when they saw the star, as well as the location. He tells them, hey, when you figure this out, when you get back, you come back and tell me, and then I can go and praise him. When in reality, as we see later on, this is all an attempt to eventually try to kill Jesus. So another thing about Herod is he actually killed a lot of his sons because he was so paranoid that they were going to take over. So you could imagine what he would do to a stranger who was being called the King of the Jews. They'd be in quite a lot of trouble. Another misconception is that the wise men, the Magi, followed this star. In reality, they saw this light in the sky. And they knew, obviously from Daniel, what that meant. And then they went to Herod, which proves that they weren't really following it, because if they were following it, they took it to the wrong person. From there, after leaving Herod, they see the light again and then proceed to go to Bethlehem, where they end up finding Jesus. So there's always a lot of talk about what this star is. A lot of people consider it the light of God's presence, which is very interesting because 600 years prior to this, when the Babylons take over and destroy, they saw the light leaving. And then accompanied by these Babylonians once again, you see the light again. So there's no account of 600 years of seeing this light, and then out of nowhere, it's back, representing God's return to this world and a return to this people in a completely remarkable new way. So another big difference between our nativity sets and what's being said in the Bible is that it's not a newborn baby. They didn't go to a manger. Jesus was born in a manger. But by this point, it's somewhere over a year, maybe even 2 years. So there's not this brand new newborn baby in the manger. They go to a house, and it specifically says a house in the Bible. There's this dichotomy that the king of the Jews at this time, Herod, is trying to kill baby Jesus, eventually kills every child under 2, any male child under the age of 2, in this desperate fear of it. And then you have Gentiles who have come this far just to worship Jesus. And this contrast is shown throughout these parts of the New Testament, and specifically these parts of Matthew. The Magi get there. Picture this. And these guys are dressed in the nines. They had a lot of wealth. You can imagine that they were able to get the meeting with the king. The king didn't just kill them when they were kind of insulting him by saying that there's another king of the Jews. These were impressive guys, dressed well, jewelry, the whole thing. And they go into this house, see the baby Jesus, and bow down and worship at him, which must have been an incredible sight, if you could imagine. It must have been strange for Mary and Joseph, who, although they've spoken with the angels, they're having this baby that's just like any other baby to them. Probably is wearing diapers, probably crying, and now all of a sudden there are these wealthy magi from the east who have come all this way to worship him, which must have been incredible. And they do give him gifts. We talked about this before. There are 3 gifts. Part of it is a substantial amount of gold. And even a gold coin was worth probably $3,300 in what it would currently be worth, and whatever the equivalent of it back then. So they got a little sack of it. So there must have been months and months, a really significant amount of money. And this comes out a little bit later, and you realize how important this actually is. Now, obviously, later on in life, you see Jesus pull gold coins out of a fish mouth. So he probably wasn't hurting for money, but at this point, it does become an incredibly valuable and incredibly meaningful gift. It also represents just the kingship. You get a king gold. The other thing was frankincense. It's an expensive sap, very sappy gifts. And this was one of the main parts of the incense that would be burned in the tabernacle all those years back as an intermediary to get the prayers and the hopes to God through that smoke. And in the same way, Jesus acts very much like this when you think that he works to bridge the gap between God and man. The other gift is myrrh, which is another sap. And that was used to actually preserve bodies or take away some of the smell of bodies and prepare them. It was an anointing oil for when people died. So in a way, these gifts represent the entirety of Jesus' life, from the birth of a king to eventually the death. So you ask yourself, why are these gifts so important right now? And we'll get into a little bit. It's going to be more into next video. But there comes a point now that the angel will come to see Joseph and say, you have to go right now. You got to wake up and go. And they have to live in Egypt for a while. And without these gifts, there would have been no way that they would be able to get to Egypt. There would be no way that they would be able to stay there for as long as they stayed. So this lesson that Daniel had taught all those years ago was meant for this very moment, to get those guys there, to give them the resources that they're going to need to survive. And that just blows my mind. And that is a story that no man could possibly invent. We hear this story every year, and everybody's reaction is pretty much either Herod's or the Magi. This lesson that there will be accountability, there will be judgment. It's scary to a lot of people, and we see a lot of people reject this idea of Jesus for that exact reason. And to the point that even if you hear about it, now people say Merry Christmas, and there are a bunch of people that get upset about it, they're behaving like Herod. They're afraid that their kingship, their king, of course, being their ego, their intellect, their lusts, they're afraid that that kingdom that they have established is not true and going to be wiped out one day. So it's a terrifying idea. And then you have the Magi, who are Gentiles, once again, who have come all this way on faith because they knew the lessons that Daniel had taught them all those years ago. And they're ready to bow down and say, this is the king of the entire universe, this baby. And I thought it was interesting how people nowadays, we have faith in Jesus, but we haven't seen him, right? So what's harder, that or going and worshiping the baby Jesus? Think about that for a second. That must have been, we talked about it, quite the moment. And they were sitting there and they had faith that this cooing, maybe even drooling, that's not heretical. He was a man. This baby was the king of the universe. They saw Jesus and they worshiped him. And so, yeah, that's kind of a question for everyone. What do you think is harder, to have never seen him and accept it, or to see him as a baby and think that this is the most important human in history who's going to redeem the sins of Adam and become an Adam 2.0? It's a very interesting concept that they painted here. So I think we'll wrap it up at that point. Later on, we'll get into what happens after this, and a little bit more of the evils of Herod and another angel visit to Joseph and their long journey. So thank you very much. I'd love to see some comments in the section. Remember to like, subscribe, share this to at least 5,000 people, and we'll talk to you next time.